Familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, mingling with the aroma of the pancakes she flipped with practiced ease. At 72, Margaret had mastered the art of breakfast, her daily ritual a blend of comfort and necessity. Today, however, there was a tightness in her chest, a subtle reminder of the strained relationship she shared with her daughter Lisa. As Margaret plated the pancakes, she could hear the sound of hurried footsteps echoing from the hallway. Lisa was late again. Margaret's heart sank a little. It was a familiar feeling, one she had grown accustomed to over the years. Lisa's busy life always seemed to overshadow her mother's existence, and each day felt like a reminder that Margaret was more of a caretaker than a loved one in her daughter's eyes. "Mom, I need to leave in 10 minutes. Lisa's voice broke through the morning silence, sharp and demanding. "I'm almost done, sweetheart," Margaret called back, forcing a smile as she arranged the food on the table. She set out the syrup, butter, and a small bowl of fresh berries, her daughter's favorite. Lisa rushed into the kitchen, her hair half-tamed, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of her corporate ambitions. The moment she entered, Margaret felt the usual chill that accompanied her daughter's presence, an unspoken tension that had woven itself into the fabric of their relationship. "Why didn't you wake me up earlier? I told you I have that big presentation today," Lisa snapped, grabbing a pancake and slathering it with syrup, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for something to blame. "I didn't want to disturb you, dear. You looked so tired last night," Margaret replied gently, hoping to convey warmth despite the barb in Lisa's tone. "Right, well, I still have to finish getting ready," Lisa replied tersely, her impatience palpable as she shoved a forkful of pancake into her mouth. "You know, I really can't keep doing this. I can't be responsible for everything around here. I'm barely keeping my head above water with work." Margaret's smile faltered, but she quickly masked her hurt. "I understand, Lisa, but I'm here to help you. You don't have to do it all alone." Lisa rolled her eyes, her expression a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "Help? By making breakfast? That's not what I mean, Mum. I need you to be more independent. You can't rely on me for everything. I have my own life." Margaret nodded, forcing herself to take a deep breath. "I know, sweetie. I just thought maybe it would help to have a warm meal before you head out. You always said you liked that." "Yeah, well, I don't have time to sit around chatting over breakfast," Lisa shot back, her voice rising slightly. "I have a deadline, and I can't afford to be late. I'll just grab a coffee on the way." As Lisa gathered her things, Margaret felt the familiar pang of disappointment settle in her stomach. She wanted to reach out, to express how much she missed the days when they used to share laughter and stories over breakfast, but the words stuck in her throat. "Have a good day at work, Lisa," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sure, whatever," Lisa replied dismissively, grabbing her bag and heading towards the door. "I'll be home late, so don't wait up." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Margaret in the silence that had become her constant companion. She glanced around the kitchen, now feeling more like a barren landscape than a home filled with warmth. The breakfast she had prepared sat untouched, a symbol of her efforts to connect with a daughter who seemed increasingly distant. With a sigh, Margaret cleared the table, her movements automatic. She washed the dishes slowly, her mind drifting to the years she had spent raising Lisa and David. A fond smile crept onto her face as she recalled the moments of joy, the laughter echoing through the halls, the warmth of family dinners. But the smile faded as quickly as it came, replaced by a dull ache of loneliness that had settled deep within her heart. As she wiped her hands on a dish towel, Margaret's thoughts turned to David. He had been her pride and joy, a bright boy with dreams that reached beyond the small town they lived in. But after the family dispute that had shattered their bond, he left without looking back. The silence he left in his wake was deafening, a constant reminder of the love that had turned bitter. She hadn't seen or heard from him in years, and though she often tried to convince herself that she was okay with it, a part of her always longed for a chance to reconcile. She moved through the house, picking up stray items, dusting surfaces, and straightening the cushions on the couch. Each task felt like a small attempt to regain control, to push away the feelings of invisibility that threatened to engulf her. But despite her efforts, the house felt empty, echoing with memories of a family that had once been whole. Margaret paused by the window, looking out at the garden that had once flourished under her care. The flowers were wilting now, much like her spirit. She had poured her heart into every petal, every blade of grass, nurturing life while feeling increasingly like a ghost in her own home. Suddenly, a car pulled into the driveway. Margaret's heart skipped a beat, a flicker of hope igniting within her. Was it David? No, it was just a neighbor stopping by, waving cheerfully as he passed. Margaret forced a smile in return, but the brief moment of excitement faded as quickly as it had come. With a heavy heart, she returned to her chores, each task a reminder of her solitude. She dusted the family photos lining the hallway, her fingers tracing over the faces of happier times. They smiled back at her, their eyes filled with love and laughter, moments that felt like a lifetime ago. As she reached the end of the hallway, something caught her eye. A small framed picture of David as a child, beaming with joy, his arms flung wide as if embracing the world. Margaret's heart swelled with a mix of love and sorrow. She picked up the frame, holding it close as tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, David," she whispered to the empty room, "where did it all go wrong?" Margaret placed the photo back on the shelf, her heart heavy with longing. The silence that enveloped her felt suffocating, but in that moment, she made a silent vow. She would find a way to reach out to David. He deserved to know that she still cared, that she was still here, hoping for a chance to mend what had been broken. With newfound determination, she began to plan how she would do it. Maybe she could write him a letter, pouring out her heart on paper, letting him know how much she missed him. The thought brought a flicker of warmth to her chest, a small glimmer of hope amid the shadows of her loneliness. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Margaret carried on with her chores, her mind now swirling with memories and dreams of reconciliation. She was tired of feeling invisible, tired of being treated like a servant in her own home. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the first step toward reclaiming her life. As the late evening sun cast long shadows across the living room, Margaret went about her routine, dusting the shelves that lined the walls of her modest home. The air was thick with nostalgia, and as she moved from one shelf to the next, her fingers grazed over the surfaces despite the weight of emotional neglect that seemed to hang in the air. It was in this quiet solitude that she stumbled upon an old photo tucked away in the back of a dusty frame. With a soft gasp, she picked it up, her heart clenching at the sight of a younger David, laughing joyfully in the yard. The sun glinted off his tousled hair, and for a moment, time blurred, pulling her back to a time before the rift that had torn their family apart. Memories flooded her mind, David's endless energy as a child, the way his laughter filled the house with warmth, and how he used to run to her with every scraped knee, seeking comfort in her embrace. "Mama, look, I caught a frog," he'd exclaimed one summer day, presenting her with a small, wriggling creature, his eyes wide with excitement. She could still hear that innocent laughter, a sound that had become a distant echo in her heart. Margaret's fingers trembled as she held the photograph closer, her mind racing with the memories and the painful realization that those moments were long gone. She thought about the last time they had spoken, the harsh words exchanged amid a flurry of anger. David had left, and with him, part of her heart had gone too. She glanced at the clock on the wall, the minute hand ticking away the seconds, each one heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Should she call him? The thought sent a wave of anxiety through her. What if he didn't want to hear from her? What if he had moved on, built a life free of the pain that their family had become? She hesitated, the phone feeling like a lifeline and a burden all at once. As if sensing her internal struggle, the house grew quiet, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind outside. She set the photo down gently on the table, her resolve wavering. "Just one call," she murmured to herself, her heart racing at the prospect. Just one call to see how he is. But as she reached for the phone, the door creaked open, and in walked Lisa, her daughter, hurried and distracted. The air shifted, tension building with every step Lisa took into the room. She dropped her bag on the floor, barely sparing Margaret a glance. "Hey, I'm home," Lisa said, her voice flat. She moved to the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge without looking back. "Do we have any leftovers? I'm starving." Margaret's heart sank. "I made you a nice dinner, dear," she replied, trying to inject warmth into her voice. "It's in the oven." "Great," Lisa mumbled, her focus still on the fridge. "You know, I really don't have time for all this. I've got to finish that report for work tonight." Margaret felt the familiar sting of disappointment, but masked it with a forced smile. "I understand, honey. But it would be lovely if you could sit and eat with me for just a little while." Lisa paused, finally looking at her mother, but her eyes were cold, distant. "I can't, Mom. I just can't. You know how hard this week has been for me. Can't you just understand that?" The words hit Margaret like a cold slap. "I do understand, Lisa, but Listen, I really don't want to talk about this now." Lisa cut her off, a wave of frustration washing over her features. She turned back to the fridge, shutting the door with a soft thud. Margaret's heart ached, but she knew better than to push further. She sighed, her shoulders slumping as she returned to her cleaning, memories of David still swirling in her mind. She could feel the weight of her loneliness settling heavier than before, and it was suffocating. As Lisa disappeared into her room with her leftovers, Margaret resumed her chores, the rhythmic sound of her cleaning providing little solace against the tide of sadness that threatened to engulf her. She glanced at the photograph once more, the innocent smile of her son a stark contrast to the reality of her life now. Hours passed, and as the night deepened, Margaret crawled into bed, the silence of the house wrapping around her. Sleep came slowly, her mind restless with thoughts of David. In her dreams, she found herself in the backyard of their old home, where David ran freely, chasing butterflies under a blue sky. His laughter echoed in the air, pure and untainted, and for a moment, all was well. "Come play with me, Mama," he called out, his arms wide open, inviting her into his world of innocence. Margaret felt a warmth spread through her as she ran to him, enveloping him in a hug, the weight of their estrangement lifting for the first time in years. But the dream began to fade, and Margaret felt herself being pulled back into consciousness. She woke with a start, the moonlight filtering through the curtains, casting shadows across her room. The dream lingered in her mind, a bittersweet reminder of what once was and what could still be. With a new sense of determination, she sat up in bed, her heart racing. Tomorrow she would reach out to David. She wouldn't let fear hold her back any longer. The thoughts surged within her like a flicker of hope, igniting a flame she thought had long been extinguished. In the morning light, Margaret rose early, her heart pounding with anticipation. She moved through the house, the photo of David still fresh in her mind, a reminder of the love that had once filled their lives. She brewed a cup of tea, the warmth of the steam enveloping her like a comforting embrace. As she sat at the kitchen table, she picked up her phone, her hands trembling slightly. This was it. She took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs before dialing the number she had memorized long ago. It rang, each tone echoing in her heart, building the tension that had been woven through her life for so long. "Come on, David, pick up," she whispered to herself, her heart racing with every ring. But as the voicemail picked up, her heart sank. "Hi, this is David. Leave a message." Margaret hesitated, her emotions swirling. "David, it's Mom. I hope you're well. I found an old photo of you, and it made me think of you. I just wanted to reach out. I miss you. Please call me back." With a shaky breath, she ended the call, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of her words hung in the air, the uncertainty of the future looming over her. Would he respond? Would he even want to hear from her? As she set the phone down, a flicker of hope ignited within her. No matter the outcome, she had taken the first step. And for the first time in years, Margaret felt a sense of purpose, a glimmer of potential for healing and reconciliation. She was ready to face whatever came next. Margaret sat at her small dining table, the sun filtering through the window, casting warm light on the blank page before her. Her heart raced as she picked up a pen, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on her. It had been years since she last had a conversation with David, her son, and now, with the memory of his childhood fresh in her mind, she felt compelled to reach out. She began to write, each stroke of the pen a cathartic release of all the emotions she had bottled up for far too long. "Dear David," she wrote, her hand trembling slightly, "I've thought about you every day since you left. The house feels so empty without your laughter, and I miss you more than words can express. There's so much I wish I could say, so many things I regret." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she pressed on. "Life has been difficult without you, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me for whatever drove you away. I long for the chance to see you again, to mend what's been broken." She poured her heart into the letter, detailing her loneliness and the ache of a mother's heart left unfulfilled. Memories of David as a child flooded her mind, the sound of his laughter echoing in the yard, his curious nature, and the way he would run to her with scraped knees seeking comfort. She remembered the day he left, the argument that had fractured their family, and how the silence that followed had been deafening. After sealing the letter with a sense of finality, Margaret felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Perhaps this was the first step toward healing. She slipped the letter into an envelope, addressing it to the last known address she had for David, her heart pounding with anticipation. Would he even want to hear from her? Would he remember the good times, or only the hurt? Days passed, each one stretching into an eternity without a response. Margaret found herself checking the mailbox obsessively, a part of her hoping and another part of her fearing the outcome. Meanwhile, Lisa's demeanor continued to darken. She returned home late most nights, her attitude sharp and dismissive. Margaret often caught herself wishing for a moment of kindness, for a glimmer of the daughter she once knew. One evening, as Margaret cleaned up after dinner, Lisa burst through the door, her face flushed with frustration. "Mom, I need you to clean up after my friends tonight. They'll be here any minute," she snapped, tossing her bag onto the couch. Margaret felt the familiar sting of Lisa's words, but she had grown weary of the endless demands. "Lisa, I've had a long day too. Can't you ask them to help?" Lisa shot her an incredulous look. "Mom, that's not how it works. Just do it, okay? I don't have time to deal with this." Margaret's heart sank. The words, "just do it," echoed in her mind, a reminder of how diminished her existence had become. "I'm not your maid, Lisa," she said softly, feeling a flicker of defiance. Lisa rolled her eyes, her impatience palpable. "You're being ridiculous. It's just cleaning up. I'm busy with my career, and I need your support, not your complaints." The conversation left a bitter taste in Margaret's mouth. She turned away, busying herself with the dishes, but the ache in her heart grew heavier. Did her daughter truly see her as nothing more than a servant? As the clatter of dishes filled the silence, Margaret fought back tears, feeling the weight of unworthiness press down on her. Hours passed, and Margaret's friends filled the house with laughter and noise. She could hear them in the living room, exchanging stories and sharing jokes, yet she felt like a ghost in her own home. She hovered near the kitchen, trying to help without being noticed, her heart aching for connection, for acknowledgement. But Lisa's friends barely glanced in her direction, and she felt invisible once more. Finally, when the last guest had departed and the house quieted down, Margaret returned to her solitude. She sank into her favorite armchair, clutching a worn quilt that reminded her of better days. She picked up the phone, contemplating whether to call David, but the fear of rejection held her back. What if he had moved on, built a life without her? The thought alone made her stomach churn. Just as she was about to surrender to despair, the phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. She grabbed it eagerly, her heart racing. "Hello?" she answered, her voice trembling with hope. "Mom?" came the warm, familiar voice on the other end. "David?" Margaret's breath caught in her throat, a wave of emotion crashing over her. "Is it really you?" "Yeah, it's me. I got your letter," he said, and Margaret felt a rush of relief wash over her. "I was surprised to hear from you after all this time." "I didn't know if you would want to talk," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too," he replied, his tone softening. "I just needed some time away to figure things out. There's a lot we need to discuss." Margaret's heart soared at the prospect of reconnecting with her son, but a thread of anxiety wove through her. I just want to understand why you left, David. I don't want to pressure you, but I need to know. No, I know, Mom. I'll explain everything when I come to visit, David assured her, a hint of excitement in his voice. I'll be there soon, I promise. As they hung up, Margaret felt a mixture of joy and apprehension. She was finally going to see her son again, but she also knew that their reunion would bring unresolved pain to the surface. The years of estrangement weighed heavily on her heart, yet she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this was the opportunity for healing, for mending the bonds that had unraveled over time. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Margaret prepared her home, cleaning and tidying, as if to create a sanctuary for their long-awaited reunion. She filled the house with the scent of freshly baked cookies, hoping to evoke the comfort of childhood memories. Each time the door creaked, her heart leapt with anticipation, only to settle back into a state of longing. But as the day of David's visit approached, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to her. Lisa's behavior was increasingly irritable, and Margaret braced herself for the inevitable confrontation. Would Lisa accept David's return? Would they be able to coexist in the same space without resentment? The night before David's visit, Margaret lay awake, her mind racing with thoughts of what could go wrong. As she stared at the ceiling, she whispered a silent prayer for strength and understanding. She yearned for a chance to heal, not just with David, but with Lisa too. She wanted to reclaim her family, to find a way to bridge the gaps that had formed over the years. As the morning sun broke through her window, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. Today was the day she would see David again. No matter what emotions surfaced, she would be ready to face them. She would embrace the possibility of reconciliation, hoping that this encounter could begin to mend the fractures in their family. The sun had just begun to set, casting a warm golden hue across the modest home that Margaret had lived in for decades. As she stood by the window, her heart raced with anticipation and anxiety. Today was the day her son David was coming to visit. It had been years since she had seen him, years filled with unspoken words and unresolved pain. She could hardly believe that he had agreed to come after all this time. The doorbell rang, and Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She rushed to the door, a nervous smile breaking across her face. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. David stood there, taller and older than she remembered, but with a familiar warmth that flooded her with memories. His hair was slightly grayer, but his eyes sparkled with the same mischief she had loved in his youth. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling with emotion as he pulled her into a tight embrace. "Oh, David," she whispered, holding on to him as if he were a precious treasure she had lost and found again. The years melted away in that moment, and she felt a rush of happiness mixed with sorrow. They stepped back, looking into each other's eyes, searching for the familiar comfort they once shared. "Come in! Come in!" Margaret ushered him into the living room, her heart swelling with joy. "I've made your favorite, chocolate chip cookies. I thought we could talk." David chuckled, a sound that reminded her of his childhood. "You always knew how to bribe me with cookies." As they settled down on the worn couch, the scent of freshly baked cookies filled the air, but beneath the sweetness lingered the bitterness of years apart. They began to chat, sharing stories about their lives, the mundane and the extraordinary. David spoke of his travels, his work, and the highs and lows that had shaped him into the man he was today. Margaret listened intently, her heart warming with each word, but the underlying tension remained palpable. "Tell me about Lisa," David finally said, his tone shifting slightly. Margaret hesitated, the name hanging in the air like a dark cloud. "She's busy, as always," Margaret replied, her voice faltering. "You know how she is with her job. I try to understand, but sometimes—" She trailed off, not wanting to burden her son with resentment. David's brow furrowed. "I understand, she always had high ambitions. But is she treating you well, Mom?" Margaret's smile faltered. "Well, she has a lot on her plate. I try to help when I can." She paused, thinking of the countless times she had cleaned up after Lisa's friends, or prepared meals that went unappreciated. But sometimes I feel invisible. David's expression darkened. You shouldn't feel that way. You deserve respect and love, Mom. He leaned forward, intensity in his eyes. I regret not being there for you. I didn't realize how much you were carrying. Before Margaret could respond, the front door swung open and in walked Lisa, her presence immediately filling the room with tension. She stopped short when she saw David, her eyes narrowing. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice laced with disbelief. Lisa, Margaret exclaimed, a mix of surprise and dismay washing over her. I didn't know you'd be home so soon. David stood, his posture stiffening as he faced his sister. I came to see Mum. We were just catching up. Lisa crossed her arms, the air thick with unspoken animosity. Well, it's good to know you have time for her now. Where have you been all these years? Her words were sharp, cutting through the fragile atmosphere like a knife. David's jaw clenched. I left because I needed to find my own way. You know that, Lisa. Why are you acting like this? Because it's not fair, David, Lisa's voice rose. You just vanished and now you show up expecting everything to be fine? You think you can just stroll back into her life? Margaret felt the weight of the conflict pressing down on her. Both of you, please, she interjected, her voice shaky. I just want to talk. I want us to be together. Together? Lisa scoffed. This isn't some happy reunion, Mum. You're just letting him waltz back in as if he hasn't heard us both. You think he cares? Of course I care, David shot back, his voice filled with frustration. I'm here now, trying to make amends. Can't you see that? Margaret stood up, feeling the tears welling in her eyes. This isn't helping. I've missed you both so much, and I can't stand watching you fight. The room fell silent, tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. David and Lisa exchanged glaring looks, each unwilling to back down. Margaret felt a swell of emotion, caught in the crossfire of her children's unresolved pain. Mum, David said softly, his tone shifting. I want to understand what happened. I want to know why we fell apart. Lisa shook her head, her arms still crossed defiantly. You think you can just come back and play the victim? You didn't have to deal with the fallout, David. You left us to pick up the pieces. Margaret's heart ached as she watched the confrontation unfold. Stop. Just stop, she pleaded, feeling the weight of the years press down on her chest. I don't want to choose sides. I want to fix this. David looked at Margaret, his expression softening. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, Mom. I was young and lost. It was easier to run away than face the pain. Lisa rolled her eyes, frustration bubbling over. And what? Now you think you can just return and everything will be okay? You don't get to play the hero when you abandoned us. Both of you need to understand, Margaret said, her voice breaking. I felt so alone for so long. You both have your own battles, but I need you both in my life. I love you both. But her words fell flat, drowned out by the storm of anger and resentment swirling around her. David turned away, his fists clenched. Maybe I should just go, he said quietly, the hurt evident in his voice. No, Margaret cried out, desperation lacing her tone. Please don't leave. We can work through this together. I can't lose you both again. David hesitated, glancing back at her, but Lisa's glare held him in place. You're the one who needs to decide what you want, David, she said coldly. If you want to be a part of this family, then you need to acknowledge what you did. Margaret felt her heart shatter as she watched her children at odds, the very fabric of their family unraveling before her eyes. David took a step toward the door, his expression torn. I can't do this right now, he muttered. David, please. Margaret reached out, but he shook his head, the pain of the past visible in his eyes. I'll come back, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, and then he was gone, leaving behind an echo of unresolved grief. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret felt as if the walls were closing in around her, suffocating her with the weight of her children's conflict. She turned to Lisa, who stood there, arms still crossed, her expression unreadable. Why did you have to act like that? Margaret asked, her voice trembling. Because it's the truth, Mom, Lisa snapped back. He can't just return and act like he's the victim. He left us and now he wants to play nice? Margaret felt a surge of anger and hurt. He's your brother. He's family. Can't you see that he's trying? Lisa's eyes flashed with frustration. Trying? He should have thought about that before he abandoned us. As the tension simmered, Margaret felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. She longed for reconciliation, for the love that had once bound them together. But instead, she stood at the crossroads of her children's pain, feeling utterly lost. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Margaret's modest home, casting a soft glow on the familiar surroundings that had both comforted and confined her for years. As she sipped her tea, her thoughts drifted to the events of the previous day. David's unexpected visit had stirred emotions she thought had long been buried. The warmth of his smile, the shared laughter, it all felt like a distant echo of the days when their family was whole. Yet beneath the surface of that joy, a storm was brewing. Today was the day she would confront Lisa. The thought of it made her stomach twist. Margaret stood in the kitchen, her heart racing, feeling the weight of the conversation looming ahead. Lisa emerged from her bedroom, her hair pulled back in a hasty bun, her eyes still bleary with sleep. She barely acknowledged her mother as she shuffled into the kitchen, grabbing a coffee cup and pouring herself a generous amount. "Morning," Lisa said, her voice flat. "Good morning, Lisa," Margaret replied, trying to inject warmth into her tone. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." Lisa rolled her eyes, her impatience evident. "Can't it wait? I have a meeting in an hour and—" "No, it can't wait," Margaret interjected, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I need to address how you've been treating me lately." Lisa's expression changed, shifting to one of annoyance. "Oh, come on, Mum. You're being dramatic. I'm busy, okay? I have a lot on my plate. You know how demanding my job is." Margaret felt the sting of Lisa's words, but she pressed on. "I understand that, but it doesn't excuse how you speak to me. I'm not your maid, Lisa. I'm your mother." "Mother or not, it's not like you're doing anything important," Lisa shot back, her voice rising. "You just sit here all day. I need you to help me, not burden me with your feelings." Margaret's heart sank. "I'm not trying to burden you. I just want you to see me, to acknowledge that I'm still here, that I still matter." Lisa scoffed, a dismissive wave of her hand making Margaret's chest tighten. "You know what, I really don't have time for this. You need to grow up, Mom. Life is tough, and I don't have the luxury of wallowing in feelings." Margaret felt her resolve shatter under the weight of Lisa's scorn. "I'm not wallowing. I just want to understand why you treat me like I'm invisible." "Because you are," Lisa snapped, her frustration boiling over. "You don't understand what I'm going through. You just sit here and expect me to cater to you. It's exhausting." Margaret stood there, trembling with a mix of sadness and anger, the air thick with unspoken words. "I'm not asking for much, Lisa. Just a little respect. Just a little love." With that, Lisa turned away, her back to Margaret, dismissing her once again. "I'm late. I can't do this right now." As Lisa stormed out, Margaret felt a tear slide down her cheek. It was a simple act, but it felt monumental. Today she would not be defined by Lisa's indifference. She took a deep breath, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Deciding on the spur of the moment, Margaret retrieved her coat from the hook by the door. She would visit David. She needed to feel connected, to escape the suffocating atmosphere that had engulfed her home. The drive to David's apartment was filled with anticipation and a hint of trepidation. Margaret had rehearsed this moment in her mind, hoping to bridge the gap of years and misunderstandings. As she parked outside his building, she took a moment to steady herself. What would she say? Would he understand the struggles she faced? She climbed the stairs to his apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. When she knocked on the door, it felt like an eternity before it opened. David stood there, looking surprised but pleased to see her. "Mum," he said, stepping aside to let her in, "this is a surprise." "I hope it's a good one," Margaret replied, forcing a smile. David guided her to the living room, which smelled faintly of coffee and something sweet. I was just making some pastries. Want some? Margaret nodded, her nerves easing slightly as she settled onto the couch. It smells wonderful. As David went to the kitchen, Margaret took in the small but cozy space. The walls were adorned with photographs, some of her and David from years ago, others showing him with friends and the life he had built away from the family. When David returned with a plate of pastries, he sat across from her, his expression shifting to concern. "What's on your mind, Mum? You look different." Margaret chuckled lightly. "Different how?" "Like you've been carrying something heavy," he said gently. Taking a deep breath, she decided to be honest. "I have. It's about Lisa and how she treats me." David's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "She's become so distant. It's like I'm just a part of the furniture to her. I don't know how to reach her anymore." David's expression softened as he listened intently. "I'm sorry, Mom. That sounds really hard." "It is," she admitted, tears pooling in her eyes. "I just want to feel like I matter, like I'm still a part of her life." David reached out, taking her hand in his. "You do matter. You matter to me." Margaret felt a warmth spread through her at his words. "Thank you, David. It means so much to hear you say that." "But," David hesitated, his gaze dropping to their intertwined hands, "I need to be honest with you too. I've been struggling with my own demons." Margaret's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "I've had a tough time with addiction," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's something I've been battling for years, and it's hard to talk about. I didn't want to worry you." Margaret's heart ached for him. "Oh, David, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." "I've been trying to get better," he continued, his voice steadying. "But it's been hard feeling like I don't belong anywhere. I think about you and the family often. I just didn't know how to come back." Margaret squeezed his hand tighter, feeling a deep connection form in that moment. "You belong here with me, David. We can work on this together." David looked up, his eyes glistening with unspoken gratitude. "You mean it?" "I do," she affirmed, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and determination. "We may have lost time, but we can start anew." "And, Lisa?" he asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "She's lost in her own world," Margaret sighed. "But maybe she'll see how much we care for each other and understand what family truly means." David nodded thoughtfully. "I hope so. You deserve love, Mum. We both do." In that small apartment, amidst the lingering scent of coffee and pastries, Margaret felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. The bond between her and David was becoming stronger, and together they could face the challenges ahead. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. As the afternoon sun began to dip low in the sky, casting a warm glow over their reunion, Margaret knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where love, understanding, and healing could flourish. She was ready to embrace it, come what may. Margaret stood in the modest living room, the faint scent of fresh lavender from the bouquet on the kitchen table wafting through the air. She had just returned from her visit with David, her heart buoyed by the warmth of their connection and the thrill of reclaimed hope. But that sense of tranquility was abruptly shattered as the front door swung open and Lisa stormed in, her face a mask of fury. "What the hell, Mom?" Lisa exclaimed, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You just up and leave without telling me? Do you have any idea how irresponsible that is?" Margaret's heart sank. She had anticipated her daughter's anger, but the intensity of it caught her off guard. "I didn't mean to upset you, Lisa. I just needed to see David. I thought—" "You thought what?" Lisa interrupted, her tone laced with incredulity. "That you could just waltz back into his life and everything would be fine. You've been ignoring me for years and now you think you can just abandon me again?" Margaret felt the familiar sting of guilt creeping in, but she fought against it. "I'm not abandoning anyone, Lisa. I'm trying to make sense of my life. You've been so consumed with your own issues that you've forgotten I'm your mother." "Excuse me," Lisa shot back, her cheeks flushed with frustration. I'm the one who has been juggling a career and everything else while you sit at home playing the victim. You don't know what I go through every single day." Margaret's chest tightened. "And you don't know what I've been through either. I've spent my life taking care of you and David, and now I just want a chance to reconnect with my son. Is that so wrong?" "It's wrong when you do it at my expense." Lisa's voice trembled, a mixture of anger and hurt bubbling just beneath the surface. "You're choosing him over me, over your own daughter. Do you even care how that makes me feel?" Margaret took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Lisa, this isn't about choosing one over the other. I need to find my own happiness too. You can't expect me to just be your servant for the rest of my life." Lisa's expression shifted, and for a fleeting moment, Margaret thought she saw a glimmer of vulnerability. But it was quickly masked by her daughter's defensive posture. "You think this is about you? It's about me feeling like I'm the only one who cares. You're being selfish." Before Margaret could respond, David stepped into the room, his presence a stark contrast to the tension that hung in the air. "What's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowing as he sensed the charged atmosphere. "Stay out of this, David," Lisa snapped, her eyes narrowing. "This is between me and Mom." "No, it's not," David replied calmly, stepping closer to Margaret. "I think it's time we all talked about what's really going on here." "What do you mean?" Lisa scoffed, arms crossed defiantly. "What could you possibly add to this conversation?" David's gaze shifted between the two women, a blend of concern and determination etched on his face. "I've been in contact with you, Lisa. I didn't just show up out of the blue. I've been trying to protect Mum from the way you treat her." Margaret's heart raced at David's revelation. She felt a rush of emotions, confusion, surprise, and a flicker of betrayal. "What do you mean you've been in contact with her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I've been calling Lisa, trying to figure out how to approach this situation without making things worse. I didn't want you to get hurt any more than you already have." Lisa's eyes widened, and for the first time she seemed genuinely taken aback. "You've been talking to him," she stammered, disbelief coloring her tone. "And you didn't think to tell me? You're just as much of a traitor as she is." "Stop it!" Margaret interjected, her voice steadier than she felt. "This isn't helping. We're all in this together. I didn't know you two were talking. David, why didn't you tell me?" "I was trying to protect you," David insisted, his voice firm yet gentle. "I wanted to help you see that Lisa's behavior isn't okay. You deserve respect, Mom, and I thought maybe if I could get through to her it would make things easier for you." Margaret felt her heart swell with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "I didn't realize you felt this way, David. I thought you had moved on and didn't care about me." "I never stopped caring," David replied, his voice low and earnest. "I've just been trying to find my way back without complicating things even more." Lisa, still grappling with the revelation, took a step back, her arms dropping to her sides. "So this is what it's come to, you two against me?" "No, it's not like that," David said, his tone soothing. "This isn't about taking sides. It's about acknowledging the hurt we've all been carrying. Mum, you've been treated like a servant for too long. And Lisa, you need to understand how your actions affect her." Margaret felt a surge of strength as she listened to her son. "I've accepted being treated poorly for too long," she admitted, her voice trembling but resolute. "I've let both of you dictate my feelings and my worth, but I won't do that anymore. I deserve to be respected and loved by my family." Lisa looked visibly shaken as Margaret spoke, her defenses crumbling. "I didn't realize," she began, her voice faltering. "No, you didn't," Margaret interrupted, her heart racing as she pressed on. "You've been so wrapped up in your own world that you forgot I'm still here. I want a relationship with both of you, but it has to be built on mutual respect. I'm not just your mother, I'm a person with my own needs and feelings." David nodded in agreement, stepping closer to Margaret. "And I want to be part of this family again, but we have to be honest with each other. No more hiding or avoiding the truth." The atmosphere shifted as Lisa absorbed their words, her anger giving way to a sense of vulnerability. I didn't mean to push you away, Mum. I just felt so overwhelmed with everything, and I took it out on you. Margaret softened, seeing her daughter's struggle laid bare. I understand, Lisa. We all have our battles, but we can't keep hurting each other. We need to communicate and support one another. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes as she looked at Margaret, her voice cracking. I'm sorry for how I've treated you. I've been so focused on my own problems that I didn't see how much I was hurting you. Margaret stepped forward, enveloping her daughter in a warm embrace. I forgive you, sweetheart, but we need to do better together. I want to be part of your life, but I need you to be part of mine too. David joined the embrace, creating a bridge between mother and daughter. We can make this work, he said softly, a smile breaking through the tension. But it starts with honesty and love. As they stood together in the small living room, Margaret felt an unexpected lightness in her heart. She realized that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. The love that had been buried beneath layers of resentment and misunderstanding was beginning to surface, and she was ready to nurture it. In that moment, Margaret understood that family could be messy, but it was also a space for growth, forgiveness, and ultimately, redemption. She knew they were all flawed, but she was willing to embrace the imperfections and work toward rebuilding their bond. With a newfound strength, she was ready to take control of her life, demanding the respect she deserved and cherishing the love that remained.